I can't believe I completely forgot about Dishonored. This is a game I tried to get into a couple of times in the past before inevitably giving up. I don't think I quite understood then what this game was going for, and yet now it's as plain as day. Dishonored has the exterior of a stealth assassin game in which you can choose to be a chaotic maniac or not, and that in turn dictates how this stylistic world at a plague-induced crossroads responds to your actions and the general tides of law. But it's actually quite a bit more than that. Dishonored released in 2012, having been developed by Arkane Studios and then published by Bethesda Softworks. Considering how stacked 2012 was, with much anticipated sequels to major franchises, you would be forgiven for thinking Arkane and Bethesda must have been smoking some serious meth if they thought a new IP could catch. But you know what? It did okay. Critically, the game was received comfortably, and players praised it for its smooth gameplay, its rich world building and environmental storytelling, and of course, its originality. Dishonored not only hit the ground running in the quality department, but it also had no competitor, at least not directly. It clearly took inspiration from the likes of Thief and Bioshock, but it was its own thing. It wasn't trying to be any other game but itself. And what that is for you, the player, to discern. You see, especially when it comes to games, the word choice is incredibly powerful and yet overutilized at the same time. Oftentimes it's a marketing gimmick, and some games manage to deliver on that promise, but others ring hollow. For Dishonored, it wasn't really a gimmick, nor even a selling point. Sure, you could boil it down to a game in which your choices matter, but in reality the game was simply what you made of it. From low chaos sneaking past guards and finding alternate means to be rid of your targets to high chaos killing everybody in a slew of carnage unrivaled in our mortal world, Dishonored actively responds to your playstyle cohesively to deliver you the experience you think you're in for, not only elevating its ability to keep gameplay and storytelling on the same page narratively, but also increasing the replay value by exponential factors. I've attempted to play through this game before not understanding its value through my own ignorance, but since finishing it for today's video, I can say Dishonored is one of the few games I've ever finished and felt a sudden itch to just start all over again right away. There are lots of games out there with replay value, don't get me wrong, but I seldom feel an urge to hit new game immediately after rolling credits, so that's one heck of an accomplishment from this 2012 title from Arkane Studios, even if that particular nugget only matters to me. What Dishonored encapsulates is experimental freedom that allows you to conduct elaborate tests to see which esoteric methods accomplish your objectives, and that same freedom allowing you to adopt a simplistic approach on a binary morality scale that doesn't dictate whether you slaughter 50 innocent guards doing their jobs per mission, nor the opposite, but simply exists to provide you with outcomes suitable to player input. And in such an atmospheric, artistic, stylistic game as this, the understated possibilities of such a game existing makes my blood pump to places that turns a particular green circle yellow, and depending on your age, dear viewer, may even send me to prison. However, let's dial it back a bit and talk about the game as a game before we descend into one of my many riffs about the oddly specific thing that a game does that makes it stick with me, like I still think about that tosser who stole a parking spot from under my nose 4 years ago. Dishonored takes us to a macabre fantasy land known as the city of Dunwall, a somewhat Victorian-inspired steampunk-esque setting that draws inspiration from 19th century industrial London and Edinburgh, two real-world city inspirations apt for a game about lurking in the shadows with a knife. And Dunwall is frankly on its arse. The city has been ravaged by a disease known as the Rat Plague, in which people are devolving into effective zombies as their bodies break down, and there are rats everywhere. I haven't dedicated enough playthroughs to connect the dots, but we'll get there. Anyway, amidst the chaos, we play as a man named Corvo Atano, who looks like this, but the game's first person and there are no mirrors that work, so we don't get to see this very often, which is a shame because that's one of the coolest character designs I've ever seen. And he's the Lord Protector and bodyguard to the Empress Jessamy, who he certainly isn't rumpy with on the sly if you understand my meaning. And this child is definitely not his, so banish the thought from your mind. Corvo has spent some time away seeking a cure for the plague, only to return seemingly empty-handed. And then the Empress is assassinated by teleporting scarecrows right in front of him, leaving her dying in Corvo's arms, taking the Empress's daughter, and framing him for the whole thing.
Her own bodyguard. Ironic.
I'll see you beheaded for this, Corvo. Take him.
6 months of spicy interrogation later, following those who actually killed the Empress revealing their scheme to Corvo, he escapes from prison with a touch of help from an unknown friend, and thus we're unleashed on the gameplay where we must sneak out of the prison, or indeed slaughter everyone. We meet a lovely fellow named Samuel the Boatman. Is that his actual name, like Mr. S. the Boatman? I hope so. He takes us to a rundown portion of the city that if I didn't know any better I would assume was Burnley. He takes us to a place called the Hound Pits Pub, and that sounds like a funny name for a boozer, but in the UK there are dozens of pubs simply named Cock, so it's not that odd. So after killing Samuel a few times, because the game lets you do it and I suppose it's funny, although people will be upset at me in the comments for doing so, but it's alright because the game won't let you commit to a world without Samuel the Boatman anyway. Corvo's roped into a conspiracy with this rat of a man who wouldn't look out of place in a conservative club gently caressing a portrait of Margaret Thatcher, and this guy whose hands are freakishly massive when compared to his face. But at least he likes an amber ale, the beverage of choice for a trustworthy individual, and together they form a band called Cumbersome Fingers. I might have made that up, but the size of their hands is startling. I'm honestly surprised they don't have to pay council tax on them. Anyway, their objective is simple: to take down the conspiracy that saw the Empress dead and place her child, that is definitely not Corvo's daughter, on the throne. And their plan for Corvo, who is framed for assassinating the Empress, is to turn him into an assassin. My god, look at the size of that cigarette. So after pouring beer from the tap straight into the drip tray, I decided to glass Admiral Havelock to death. And then it was time to go and meet Piero, who promises to craft us the tools of a master assassin, but first we must handle explosive substances. Upon successfully doing so without blowing the man up, he gives us a cool mask, and then we go to bed, only to have a funny dream. But unlike my usual dreams that fall under the category of analog horror more often than not, we find ourselves in a strange realm. It's here where we meet the mysterious entity known as the Outsider, who gives us the gift of magical abilities, allowing us to teleport and shit. He also gives us the heart of a living thing that he'd made earlier, like some avant-garde Mr. Maker, and he leaves us by saying what we do with these gifts is up to us. And this is where the integral premise of the game is established. We have some degree of agency over how we apply gameplay mechanics, and that's going to matter. Not that we're necessarily expected to understand the extent of that just yet. But it's a good time to talk about it now we've been unleashed on our first proper mission. I mean, the mission we had in the prison did count, however it isn't really at any point acknowledged that your playstyle can affect outcomes, with the only thing suggesting otherwise being the fact sheet you receive at the end, detailing who you killed and how much chaos you caused in general, and reflecting on any special actions performed. However, with that premise now expanded upon thanks to the Outsider's conversation with us, the first mission that follows is where on a first playthrough you start to feel as if being mindful does count towards something. You see, Dishonored's thing, the thing that makes it stand out, is the fact that it's cohesive. Meaning at no point is the gameplay really dissonant to the storytelling. The storytelling adapts depending on your playstyle. In the first few chapters though, this only really applies vaguely. So per the Outsider's remark, it truly is up to you how you go about accomplishing your task. And your task isn't necessarily a foregone conclusion. If you so wish to do so, you can kill whom you please. You can treat it like that assassin fantasy if that's the flavour of game you're craving, and there are many means through which you can accomplish this in gameplay, whether that be through mastering the satisfying mechanics of the combat, or by skulking around and picking off your foes one by one in stealth, combining timing, quick movements, abilities and tools to create satisfying chains in which you truly feel like a ghost. However, this loud and proud or otherwise violent approach can run the risk of losing cohesion with the plot in many games that have it, because often in games, regardless of whether or not you kill everyone in your wake, the game still treats you like the good guy. But that isn't necessarily the case. In the context of Dishonored, you play as a man who's been betrayed and set up for the murder of his lover/empress, and the people you're killing are often soldiers loyal to the same values that you held before this betrayal. The only difference between Corvo and anyone Corvo can kill, haplessly in these missions, is the fact that he's aware of the true enemy within, and if everyone else was, well, maybe they'd all be on the same page and not fighting one another. You can use the logic to justify this as a thing Corvo would do after 6 months of torture following the death of your empress, whom you were loyal to, and then you're framing for that murder, and of course the abduction of your own daughter as the cherry on top. You could understand why Corvo would be quite the angry guy, Considering his skill set and motivations, you can make a case for a ruthless run, so choosing that playstyle is justified. However, it is arguably the easy route, and what we'll talk about a bit later on is how the game explores the consequences that would naturally come with taking that easy warpath. I'm not saying it's easy in terms of gameplay necessarily, what I am saying is there are some immediate perks that come with it, albeit at the expense of what comes next by design. The polar opposite approach relies more heavily on stealth, using far less lethal means to get past guards and to where you need to be, and tends to be a much slower paced, thoughtful gameplay experience in which you'll find yourself paying more attention to your environment, picking up on far more lore, mindfully manoeuvring yourself into a position where you can accomplish your objectives, causing minimal disturbance and chaos in the process. It's only through this particular approach, or at least adopting some modicum of it, that you realise just how many opportunities there are and just how many variations there are to completing your task. Although the premise of the game appears to be that you function sort of similarly to an assassin, there's quite literally an achievement called Clean Hands, acquired by not killing anyone over the course of your entire playthrough. But that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be militant to your playstyle. Killing the odd individual here and there isn't going to make much of a difference. You can still achieve a low chaos run while playing as an assassin, just as easily as you can complete a high chaos run while being merciful on the off occasion. It is the bulk of your actions that count towards where the story is going to go. That above all else accounts for fuck-ups in trial and error gameplay. However, this is one of those games where it's common practice to save often, and in the event that something doesn't go the way that you want it to, you load back to that quick save and then try again using a different means, hoping for a different outcome. My preference in playstyle is to roll a bit with the experience and do what just feels natural to me in the moment, and that gives me a fairly good idea of the endless trove of possibility that is this game's gameplay. It's the kind of gameplay that I'd describe as 99.9% smooth and 0.1% awkward. There are moments where things don't quite behave the way they should, but for the most part it's a fairly fluid experience, and most jank comes from player error, in which there are many examples in my footage because I'm not awfully good at games, I just like them. The combat is simplistic in its delivery. It's a defensive-based system in which you parry and then counterattack to be efficient, using a ranged weapon in your offhand to deliver cheap damage. It's not the most visually appetizing thing in the world, but that's unimportant. What's important is that it feels good when you're playing it. The combat isn't discouraged, but it is challenging due to the fact that it can very quickly become overwhelming. And so, despite its fairly straightforward nature, you do have to think on your feet. For the most part, it's a soft fail state for stealth, but the system can be learned and be rewarding. This is because it's incredibly fast-paced, and in many respects relies on you utilising your abilities and tools in tandem with more direct means to do physical harm to another human being. So often I'll find myself flicking through my quick access tools and abilities wheel about 20 times per fight, and though that's kind of jarring to look at in recorded footage in hindsight, in the moment it felt way more fluid. Although I'd imagine on keyboard and mouse there's a quicker way that doesn't require opening the wheel every time you wish to change your offhand tool. I don't really have the nimble fingers to be a keyboard and mouse supremacist. The stealth is where Dishonored thrives in my opinion, because it does require you to slow down. The game's chapters are full of alternate pathways that allow you to avoid direct confrontation. My preference is to use a combination between the blink ability and the climbing mechanics to avoid the ground level wherever possible, because that's naturally where the enemy count is the most dense. But the stealth itself relies on fairly straightforward mechanics. You need to remain crouched for your footsteps to go unheard and remain unseen, otherwise you'll be detected because, well, obviously you've been seen. You can use an ability that's a bit like Eagle Vision from Assassin's Creed to pay attention to where enemies are, even if there are walls between you and them, which gives you a better idea of casing your environment before you step into it. And when you do drop bodies, there's a quick button to allow you to pick them up so that you can place them somewhere they won't be found, which of course in failing doing so will alert guards to the fact that you're somewhere nearby. And that description does sound like it simplifies Dishonored an awful lot. High and low stealth works on a completely different axis to high and low chaos, and the challenge with Dishonored is finding where the fun can balance the two. With that in mind, I poisoned High Overseer Campbell, so he's dead, concluding the only chapter in which my high chaos approach actually made any sense. It's in the next chapter that I did something called being nuts. And it did, in my opinion, highlight an issue with where the wires crossed in Dishonored. Not that it's especially egregious. Simply put, Dishonored gives you a level and makes you figure out what you want to do with it. At no point does it really encourage you to go one route or another, and there are many opportunities, both intended and unintended, to complete any given objective. Choice is portrayed chiefly through how you play the game, and that's nice, but your playstyle isn't what dictates high and low chaos. It all merely boils down to how many people you killed. And this extends to how you deal with the actual targets. But unlike with High Overseer Campbell, where both lethal and non-lethal approaches requires you to at least get stuck in, this second chapter is one of a couple of examples where you have to skip the game to avoid skipping the game. For context, we're here to assassinate the Pendleton brothers and, more importantly, rescue Lady Emily. In order to facilitate the non-lethal approach, we need to rub elbows with a fella named Slackjaw, the boss of the Bottle Street gang. He gives us a couple of optional objectives that if we complete, he will take care of the Pendletons for us, meaning we only have to focus on rescuing Lady Emily. In either low or high chaos in my case, it is an approach that simplifies matters, as we no longer have to focus on even laying eyes on the Pendletons. We just have to torture an art dealer who's clearly into some kinky shit, rescue Emily Coldwin, and leave. However, exploration of the level's ultimate environment becomes minimal, and deciding to explore anyway no longer feels fitting. However, if you didn't go through that massive rigmarole with Slackjaw, it'd feel as if you were missing something there. Now, you could make the completionist case of needing to collect the bone charms and the runes, but I do believe aiding Slackjaw was more supposed to be tailored towards the low chaos run than the high chaos one, and there's very little of use that you can do with runes and bone charms if you're avoiding killing people. I suppose the existence of this very external approach to dealing with the Pendletons does add some aspect of replay value, of which Dishonored has in abundance. But in some instances, with this example in particular, it can also make it a bit tricky to gauge how satisfyingly you have interacted with the chapter in question. Nevertheless, on the whole, there is a big positive to take away from this chapter, and that is that the game goes to rather elaborate lengths to ensure that every target has a means to deal with them that doesn't require you to kill. And as we know, on a low chaos run, not killing will go towards the de facto good ending.
It's only natural that you be curious about what I intend to do with the Pendletons. See, the Pendletons got these rock mines, have hundreds of souls working down there half a mile deep below ground. So I'm gonna shave their heads and cut out their tongues and put them in one of their own stinking mines.
And I say de facto because often you'd be subjecting your targets to a fate worse than death. But I'll allow it. Awkward details aside, it's still clever. I think the biggest point I want to take away from this chapter was realising how easy the game makes it for you to contradict yourself. Since I'm clearly no stranger to a good killing, sparing the Pendletons' lives was perhaps the only moment where I thought, hang on, am I playing this wrong? But in truth, it just plays into the heavy lifting of Dishonored's replay value. The first time around, things are meant to be a bit of a mess. The game is, however, confident that you'll play it a second time, albeit with more intent. And that's how players become committed to ghost runs or clean hands runs, or on the flip side a total killing spree, in which you cling to the extremes of the chaos spectrum, because it's through the inconsistencies in your first proper playthrough that you learn properly how that entire thing works. Understandably, that can make the game a bit like Marmite. But I fucking love Marmite. Anyway, I think I've dedicated the bulk of the video so far to the game being about choice and your playstyle being the most important choice. But what does that choice actually affect? Well, simply, the world around you. Despite Dishonored being a linear game, the world building is bonkers. The environments feel tight, dense, full of life, and there's so much lore to soak in if only you pay attention and look. There's so much to overhear, read and see that provides extra detail on what's actually going on in this world, to the point where it feels not just authentic and lived in, but you actually feel as if opening the game has teleported you to this fictional world. And this world responds to your chaos level as well. On high chaos you find more rats all over the place. The plague that has got this city by the balls will get worse as the game goes on. But in low chaos the situation won't be as bad. And that's a neat subtle way to indicate the importance of your playstyle. But to speak about the city of Dunwall in more of a vacuum, I found it to be incredibly immersive. It's a nice industrial fantasy city with strange contraptions that, though anachronistic when compared to our own history, make perfect sense in the context of the game. It's a pungent industrial dystopia, full of poverty and sickness. And the art style is made fitting through what can only be described as oily expressions. Everything is carefully designed to ensure that we understand Dunwall is a city at a crossroads, and we have some influence over which way it goes. This unsanitized setting is the perfect backdrop for the kind of game that Dishonored is. The fate of Dunwall is on a knife's edge, and that knife is firmly in the hands of Corvo Attano. It's up to us whether we add to this ravaged city's despair, or actively try to be better. Considering the location is going through a dark time in which half of the population has been ravaged by this disease, Dunwall has a naturally dark feeling. It lends itself incredibly well not only to stealth but also the assassin fantasy on the whole. There's also something naturally disquieting about combining that theme with industrial retrofuturism. With every step you take in Dishonored, you feel as if you're wading through an atmosphere thick with oppression and misery. It's a world in which human advancement and creation has gone so far, and yet the human element has been completely lost. In other words, the fictional world we're seeing depicts the Industrial Revolution, but on steroids. Much of the scenery you explore is dominated by rundown buildings, impoverished, diseased individuals, and the general feeling of hopelessness. And for that to feel authentic, it needs a foil, and in Dishonored that comes in the form of a class divide. Bringing us to what is perhaps my favourite chapter of the entire game. Following a mission in which we abduct a fella who looks a bit like Rasputin, we're sent to a masked ball at the Boyle estate in which we're tasked with eliminating a target simply known as Lady Boyle. Outside the estate we can observe Dunwall to be in that familiar state of disrepair, or at least take on board the dark, gloomy atmosphere that is the reality for the vast majority of Dunwall's citizens. However, once inside the Boyle estate, things very quickly change. Not only does stealth become incredibly social because everybody's wearing a mask, we're simply let in, but the atmosphere also shifts. The gloom of the vast majority of Dunwall hasn't quite touched here yet, though you can see it off in the distance. Following dueling a guy because the average Margaret Thatcher lover can trick you into doing so, which for the record goes a bit like so.
3, 2, 1.
We can head inside where we're met with a wealth of colour, opulent decor, food in abundance, snobbish guests in fancy dress. The plight of the peasantry has yet to reach this place. There's still something off about the place, but it's a far cry from the hellish condition of the streets of Dunwall. For the wealthy of the city, life is still quite extravagant. For these people, at least for the time being, the plague is still a topic of conversation rather than a pressing issue. And it's that misguided air of untouchability that makes exploiting the premise of a masked ball to blend in with these wealthy individuals, with ease might I add, so compelling. Because the game hasn't just turned itself on its head to provide you with the perfect scenario for remaining undetected, but it's done so in such a way that makes you want to plunge a knife into somebody's heart just for the shock value of proving that they can indeed be touched. However, it isn't that simple, as there are 3 Lady Boyles and we need to figure out which one is who we're here to take out. And only then can we decide whether to spoil the festivities or find another way. With that in mind, it's probably one of the easiest missions to do in low chaos, because you have to go out of your way to get a confrontation here. One of my favourite details about this mission though is you can sign the guest book as Corvo Etano. So in the event you decide to kill your target, they can read the name of a wanted fugitive in their book and realise you walked straight past them and they didn't notice. Because it's a game and it's not real, it has no actual impact, but I just find that kind of detail so uniquely chilling for reasons I can't even really put into words. But I suppose it plays into that feeling of wanting to prove that they aren't as untouchable as they think, no matter how ivory the tower is. Anyway, the non-lethal option presents itself quite easily. This disturbed looking fella, named Lord Brisby, will tell us he knows of our mission and reveals the identity of the Lady Boyle we're after, which changes, by the way. It can be any of the 3, which requires you to adapt accordingly. Anyway, this nutjob claims that he loves our target and doesn't want us to kill her, so he proposes an alternate means. Bring the target to a boat he has ready in the cellar, and simply put, we'll never see her again. And how you convince the Boyles will depend on which Boyle is your target. For Waverly Boyle, the one in black, you simply have to prey on her paranoia. This way she'll go down into the cellar without a fight, and you can choke her out in seclusion. Or indeed take this serene opportunity to end her life. And judging by Brisby's behaviour, I'm not entirely sure which is better for her.
You found her! Quickly, let's get her on board. Last, oh my love. Someday you will understand. You'll never know how happy you've made me. Someday she'll learn to appreciate me. After all, she'll have her whole life.
Well, I'm not sure how that will contribute towards being seen as a good person, but with the job done we can return to Samuel the boatman, and along the way discover that a guard standing in a doorway takes up the entire doorway. Anyway, with the party successfully navigated without causing a fuss, we can return to big old Sam, and from there the supple comforts of a partially demolished council estate. Pendleton's tricking us into a duel was certainly an interesting one. It's a hint that perhaps these loyalist conspirators aren't as noble as they first seemed. But there's no time to really pay much attention to that because the time has come to strike the Lord Regent, taking us back to Dunwall Tower where the game began, where we can see just how much has changed. You know the drill, we can sneak, slaughter or scrap our way through. As a bit of a side note, engaging with tall boys in open conflict can be a bit of a faff. With a bit of know-how and the right tools it's doable, but your best bet is to not scrap them where avoidable. They'll leave you in ruins. But whatever method you employ, provided it works, we find ourselves with, at this point, what is the bog-standard Dishonored dilemma. To either kill the Lord Regent and former Royal Spy Master Hiram Burrows, or to expose him for the treacherous little wanker he is, with a side dish of getting payback on the torturer for conducting a spicy interrogation on you by sending him to spicy sleep. There's also an outsider shrine down here that I'm yet to touch down upon. Basically, at these shrines you can find runes, but more importantly the outsider will speak with you, telling you about your journey so far and reveal information regarding your target.
He's not an easy man to get close to. If the Empress had been as well guarded, how different things would be now. Is it just revenge you're after, or do you have another plan in mind? Will you restore things, make it all right again and crown a new Empress? Or will you send them all howling into the void? Either way, I expect a good show.
On that note, the outsider is genuinely fascinating. A mysterious, ambiguous being of supernatural qualities, he appears to be something of a god, one illegally worshipped to some extent within the Dishonored universe, but that doesn't please him. He only seems interested in seeing what the people he deems interesting will do with the gifts he grants them, imposing no further conditions. He joins the ranks of mysterious, cryptic, otherworldly characters in games that evade comprehensive understanding, like Gaunter O'Dim in The Witcher 3 or the Strange Man in Red Dead Redemption. And that tasteful inability to comprehend a character's very existence satisfyingly scratches my curious itch. And he also reminds me how erratic my playthrough has been up until this point. You see, aside from killing High Overseer Campbell, and more or less doing the Boyle estate as the game intended, my chaos level hasn't exactly lined up with how I've been dealing with the targets. I've revelled in this game's potential to become a bloodbath on many occasions up until this point, and yet when it comes to dealing with the targets I've decided to, well, not kill them? My playstyle can be described as mentally ill. If we find our way up to the propaganda office, the propaganda officer, in a bid to plea for his life, will suggest that we expose the Lord Regent for the traitor that he is. But trust me, kill him. This is the guy whose voice airs on the loudspeakers throughout Dunwall, so killing him will change the voice, and that voice will change to Carrie Fisher's. Anyway, he tells us of a safe in the Lord Regent's bedroom in which there's an audio file where he basically grasses on himself.
If I explain, then you will see I am not at fault. My poverty eradication plan was meant to bring prosperity to the city, to rid us of those scoundrels who waste their days in filth and drink, without homes or occupations other than to beg for the coin for which the rest of us toil. And it was a simple plan. Bring the disease-bearing rats from the Pandician continent and let them take care of the poor. What are you doing? The plan worked perfectly. This is treated at first. It's over, but the rats, it was as if they sought to...
I'm so glad he kept an audio file in which he confesses to his crimes by his bed. But hey, I didn't kill him, I just killed everyone else, including 2 civilians. But you know what, that's a small sacrifice for the greater good. We return to the Hound Pits pub with the game now seemingly over. But wait! Don't drink the beer, Corvo! The game's been too short, it's been No matter which way you go about playing the game, you're betrayed. Samuel poisons you, but since he doesn't want to kill you, he only gives you half of the poison. It's here where your choice in playstyle and chaos rating really come to the forefront of Dishonored's storytelling, and the first indicator of this is whether or not you receive a lecture from Samuel the Boatman.
Why I keep sticking my neck out for you eludes me, but I only gave you half the poison, Corvo. They were watching me do it, but not close enough. Maybe you'll survive it. I can hardly blame them for turning on you, after all the people slaughtered in the name of this cause. Those are crimes of state, and maybe they figure it'd be too hard to control Emily with you around. Could be they're right on that score. I'll drop you in a boat, and then I've got to ship out myself before they smother me in my sleep. That's the next thing. Makes the most sense. If you're lucky, you'll wake up and find your way out of this doomed city. If not, well, goodbye.
Sit rep. I've upset Samuel the Boatman. The final few chapters of the game are moulded by your actions. Firstly, we find ourselves in the captivity of the assassins who killed the Empress at the start of the game. A chapter that has us explore through one of the most heavily plague-stricken districts in the city and come face to face with the assassin who killed the Empress himself, Dowd. So of course, once we've recovered from being poisoned, we must fight our way through the flooded district, or indeed sneak, and by this point the level design very much so hinges on your morality. Low chaos, you'll find it a bit easier to sneak around. High chaos, you'll find more combat opportunities that you so clearly revel in. Now this district is arguably where Dishonored is at its most depressing. It's a lifeless slum filled with those infected with the rat plague known as the Weepers. Their bodies have been ravaged by the illness and their minds have been warped to the point where their behaviour barely resembles that of a human. This is the world that our actions have helped condemn Dunwall to. A miserable hellhole partially carved in the wake of our vengeful wrath, in which the innocent working people, the people who truly matter, have been reduced to husks. And though it feels like a mercy killing to end their miserable existence in this state, for some meta reason it is partially our fault that the plague has gotten this bad. So either which way, there is blood on our hands. You see, it's quite straightforward in the sense that if we play the game like a murderous maniac, as I tend to, the city of Dunwall has absolutely no reason to be optimistic about virtually anything. But if we go the low chaos route, the hordes of Weepers are lighter, the enemy count is lighter, and though there are surely storytelling reasons for it, that isn't the primary purpose. The purpose is Dishonored, as you get to the back end of the game, becomes more of the game that you perceive it to be. So the final third of the game leans into your playstyle, therefore rewarding it. If facing Dowd in low chaos, he will tell his guards to stand down because the fight is his, which is honourable in a way, but in high chaos he won't issue the same command because he knows you'll attack them anyway. But that doesn't mean all of the game's choice is now in the past. We can still choose to either kill Dowd or spare his life.
I have one more surprise for you. I ask for my life.
It would appear as if I am what the kids call a massive twat. With Dowd taken care of, we must escape the flooded district and return to the Hound Pits pub, where we see yet more of the consequences of our actions. Everyone who wasn't a core part of the conspiracy has been killed, and unfortunately the local is now flooded with guards on the prowl.
This can't happen. Stop it.
Leaving us with the task of either fighting or sneaking our way through what was once the hub area, in hopes we'll find a clue as to where the Loyalists went and what they did with Emily. Fortunately, Sokolov and Piero are alive, and they give us a means to either knock every guard in the area out, or reduce them to dust. Despite being fairly highly chaotic, I decided that reducing them to dust was overkill, so I just sent them to snooze, leaving us with the freedom to now venture up to Emily's tower and find out what's happened. Then we fire a flare out the window and Samuel the Boatman quite literally spawns. I'm not sure why he continues to help us in high chaos, as he makes it clear he doesn't really like you for your actions. But the good news is he's willing to take us to where the Loyalists and Emily are. Oh, and he suggests he might have come down with the plague, one of the worst consequences of high chaos. And it's in this final mission that we must take out the Loyalists. Martin is mooching about with loads of guards around him, which you need to be mindful of. Pendleton's too busy crying, which makes ending him a doddle, and Admiral Havelocks up the lighthouse with Emily. Joke's on you, child, I'm the monarch now. Yes, the game will let you commit to an ending in which Emily dies, but if anything, that actually subtracts from the chaotic ending, as upon rescuing her you realise how your actions have impacted her view of the world as well.
The others are all dead, aren't they? That's alright, because I was going to have them killed anyway. I am going to be Empress.
And I suppose that's a big way in which your choice of playstyle dictates the future of Dunwall. In my case, I played the story as a maniac and got an ending befitting of one. Emily does sit atop the throne, but hardened by my nefarious actions. Dunwall is still in a state of crisis, and Samuel decides to go to sea because he'd rather die there than of the plague. And it's in rolling the credits on that note that you realise that your actions have an impact on the future of this universe. And that's where the replay value comes in, where you replay the game hoping for a different outcome. If, indeed, you care. The low chaos ending may not even be the most attainable outcome the first time around, but it's like I said, the game convinces you to start all over again and replay it with purpose, to avoid killing like the plague, to get the ending in which it's not implied that Emily will become a tyrant, to conclude the game on a note where it's implied Samuel doesn't get the plague, and to end the game on a note in which Dunwall might just have a chance at an optimistic future. And in failing that, just to observe how different the final few chapters are when you exercise restraint. The game imposes no expectation that you absolutely must do this, but that's what makes it feel so worthwhile to do. Because though this is a linear game, there is so much left to explore. There is no way you can take on board all of it in one playthrough. And I'm not just talking about the differences between high, medium and low chaos, but also the insane attention to detail that accents this game at every turn. There's so much to learn about this world, this city, the fate of which is in your hands. So even in the scenario where you're tackling the broad strokes of the storytelling in the same way, it's not just a maybe that you'll happen upon something you missed, it's guaranteed. Dishonored is the kind of game that, though linear, always provides you with something else to see, perhaps even something else to do. This game was immensely well crafted, and though it has balancing issues that are especially noticeable if you try to cling to a low chaos playthrough, everything about Dishonored feels logical, purposeful, and meaningful. This isn't a game that wants you to fire it up for a few hours, blast through all of the chapters, close the game, and never touch it again. It wants you to keep coming back to it, to keep experimenting, to keep exploring, to keep engaging. And it does that by providing both the perfect playground for experimentation and exploration, but also by convincing you of the authenticity of the world around you and your significance within it. A world that adheres to its own consistent logic, is artistic in its styling and thematically appropriate, filled with world building and lore, some of which you may stumble across, but other examples you have to go out of your way to find. And in a multi-layered way, you can do this. Dishonored is a cohesive game, and that is what makes it immersive. It's a masterstroke that, provided your mind is open to it, will suck you straight in. And that is why I can't believe I forgot about Dishonored, because it is truly something to behold. Not only do I admire Dishonored as a gaming experience, but I also admire the philosophy upon which Dishonored was developed. And that was to simply be an absolute work of art. And I'm going to leave today's video there. I really enjoyed revisiting Dishonored, even though it's been like 12 years since this game released. I don't think it's quite been 12 years yet, but it is a game that I forgot about for quite a long time. The last time I played it before recording for this video was actually 2017. This is a game of qualities that truly make it stand out, and it's refreshing to play even now. Perhaps even in my case, especially now. But I'll tell you one thing, I'm yet to dive into this game's expansions, and of course, the sequel, Dishonored 2. So if you enjoyed today's Lunatic's ramble, please let me know in the comments, and maybe there'll be more content on the Dishonored franchise in the near future. Aside from that, thank you all for watching. I really hope that you've enjoyed today's video. If you did, be sure to go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends, all that wonderful stuff. Of course, if you want to only. And if you happen to have opinions on this game that you'd wish to share in the comments section, please. After all, that is what that bloody thing is there for. So, with any luck, I'll be seeing you all very soon with another video at some point. But until next time, please take care and goodbye.
please. My heart won't take this. Ask me anything. I screwed the Pendletons, yes. And I've been to the Brimsleys. They worship the outsider. I've seen it. I did it too.